All right, I think that we are going to go ahead and get started. We have a pretty busy day today. We are going to keep the beverages in the room all day long, so feel free to either get up there and get your energy intake or ask someone to help you if you need any help with that. Let me see if I can manipulate this little device. Okay, an engineer needs to develop a little bit bigger clicker for quads, okay? All right, here we are. So just briefly, logistics, we're gonna have 4 sessions today, and you guys all have the agenda. It was also in the pre-meeting material. And we'll have break and lunch in between. And then right at the end at 4 o'clock, we're gonna have a small reception just outside the doors here. And just to thank everybody for all the hard work that we're gonna do today. I wanna call out that we do have about 27 people that are attending online to our meeting. And what I really, really value that. And what I want to do is after each presentation, when we open it up for questions, I'm actually going to open it up to the online attendees first, because I really want to make sure that we keep them engaged. And so Devin is going to be our monitor back there, and he'll be watching for questions that people can type into the chat as they come in. And then when it's time to open up for questions, Devin will go to you, and then we'll open up to the rest of the floor as well. So, what's the right angle for me to be at? I might borrow somebody's hands. You want to be the clicker, Barry? Or, yeah, Megan, you want to be a clicker? Okay. Put your fingers to use. The far right one is forward. All right. So everyone got the pre-meeting material. We're here to be action-oriented meeting, so I hope everybody did their homework and are prepared. We have the agenda. We have had a really good update in our membership and an overview of our financials for the year. Remember, NASCIC is only about, well, in December, it'll be 2 years old. And we've had a lot of activity this year in projects. There's updates in the material for you. And there are some highlights where I'm gonna give you preliminary results of our needs assessment survey that we're doing. But that is still open, so there's a flyer in that material for people to continue to add their input. There's a highlight in the pre-leading material about our partnership with the FDA in the Patient and Care Partner Connection Program, and the survey that the FDA is doing for the spinal cord injury community, specifically to get feedback right now on our experiences with medical devices of many different kinds, and also the problems that we have with medical devices. Then we're going to talk a little bit later about a new resource that is out called scitrials.org. There's a flyer in your pre-meeting material. And then the final session today is going to be, what are we going to do now as our community after the SCI 2020 meeting and everything? There was some discussion yesterday at the end of the meeting at Working to Walk about different stakeholders and where they are. And so we're going to talk about what are we going to try to do to impact change in the process. So if we can go to the next slide. I want to acknowledge and thank a couple people first. So at last year's meeting, we decided to create a project review committee. And that review committee involved different members. And so initially it was Jen, Anita, Jane, and Ian. And John was heading that up as vice president. And then we started to get a growth in projects coming in pretty quickly. So we needed to expand it. So we put out a call and we got 5 additional members very quickly that are all really, really engaged, and they are really working themselves on this project review committee, and they are giving really good input into the projects that are coming in to partner with NASCIC. So I really want to thank their time in volunteering all of that. If we go to the next slide, we actually have, I wanted to acknowledge all the different people in all the different locations that are actually participating and contributing to the different projects that we are doing in different topic areas. And you'll see on the project update in the pre-meeting material which projects people are helping with. We have 2 new projects that are actually recruiting more people now. And we have just started to send out recruitment notices for those individual projects. All right, so if we go to the next thing, I also just want to acknowledge Executive Council that has really been working hard this year. I'm at the end of my 2-year term, and John was finishing his 2-year term, and the projects really expanded and became a little more than could fit into John's schedule. So the Executive Council appointed Jen to sit in as interim, but I'll tell you about the elections that we're going to have at the end of the day. And Barry is our treasurer, that's a 1-year term. And then our delegates on the council have been Bill Fertig, Sasha Rybchevsky, Matthew Roderick, and Rob Woodlick, and John Chinesky came on as an ad hoc member. And there are different variations of terms, so we have cycling through the Executive Council. But I want to thank, all of us meet once a month and really discuss all the different issues, and we get everybody's input. And then since about this summer, Jen and Barry and I have realized we have to actually start meeting once a week to really try to enact these things and then come back to the Executive Council each month and get more input. So let's go to the next slide. And most importantly, on the introduction, I really do want to thank the people that are supporting us. We were able to get an infrastructure grant from the Nielsen Foundation that started January 1st, and it is for 3 years. And it is to enable us to try to get some assistance with some administrative assistance and the ability to really start to utilize tools that you actually have to pay for, can't do everything volunteer. So that infrastructure grant is actually really critical in helping us also to build a plan for the sustainability of NASCIC after this 3-year infusion of funds. And then very importantly for the meeting, we've got several sponsors and they're all here. FES Center and APT Center that are here based in Cleveland, Synapse Biomedical, Scoburg, and Rick Hansen Institute, and also DP Clinical. And so just after lunch, we'll be having a partner panel with 4 different representative partner members for us to really interact back and forth and what can we, NASCIC, do to help our partners more. Okay, if we go to the next slide. I want to go into the needs assessment survey. So everyone, I hope everyone knows that when we were invited to be part of the SCI 2020 panel called With Us, Not For Us, we really felt we needed to go out to the community, and the community needs to inform us about the different topics that we were going to address at SCI 2020. So we did that. We had a really amazing response, and we had a really, really large impact at that meeting. And then after the meeting, there was all different kinds of feedback that came back. And we really felt we needed to go back to our community for further guidance on what direction are we going to do. We know we can't do everything. And we know our strength is with our organizational membership. So what should be guiding us? And it really should be the community that we are serving that should be guiding us. So we started this, go to the next slide. We started a survey in mid-July, and it was really to kind of help with some of the themes that came out of SCI 2020 and topics related to our mission and topics that we thought NASCIC could potentially start putting specific effort to. So we have 590 responses, which is the data that I'm going to show you. But that was as of last Saturday. And we are now, last time I looked, over 605, 610 responses. So we'll probably close it pretty soon because I think that the data is going to be pretty telling to us. So let's go forward to the next slide. The first question that we asked was related to our mission. When NASCIC formed, it was really out of the Praxis Conference 3 years ago now in Vancouver. And it was really related to research. And there were a lot of us there, a lot of us in this room that were there. And so we had a lot of expertise in research. So we really were starting to build a lot of our activities related to research. But the mission that we created when we formed NASCIC was that we would bring about unified achievements in research, care, cure, and policy by supporting collaboration across our community. So we asked the people out there in the world living with spinal cord injury, please rank these different parts of our mission so that we can better guide our efforts. So if we go to the next, this is the slide. If you see, probably the first thing that a lot of you see is that, okay, there's cure and there's care. And that's been a long-standing point in our community, cure and care. And for a long time, it's been cure versus care, but I don't think it needs to be one versus the other. Research feeds into medical care, and problems in medical care cycle back to research. We really should be helping in all aspects of cure and care. And if we can make our system more successful, people will be feeling the impact of research in care. And so also another thing that stands out to me, cure doesn't happen without research. So cure and research is still a very high priority to our community. So we should still be moving our efforts significantly on research, but we have to start adding in care there. And it looks like policy is the lowest ranked, but actually, when we get to our next slide, policy is really important for some of the problems that people are experiencing. So my interpretation of this glance of the data without having discussed it with everyone is that we actually still need to keep all 4 prongs in our mission. Okay, let's go. I'm gonna go through all the data and then we'll pause for a discussion. The next thing the executive council, we all queried each other and said, okay, what are some things that we could start really directing efforts on in the next year or 2? How does the community want to guide us? So we came up with 5 or 6 different topics, and we asked people to rank these in importance, and we'll go to that slide. So the #1 ranked topic was improving access to SCI specialized care. Not a lot of our organizational members probably know the real serious extent of this. Having access to care from people that know about spinal cord injury is really difficult to find and maintain access to. #2 was improving access to available research studies and research trials. That's really 2 really important areas. And then now look at the last 3. This brings back the point of policy. Improving reimbursement for therapy or adaptive fitness, improving reimbursement for assistive technology, and improving financial assistance for PCAs, personal care attendants. All 3 of those are going to take policy changes in all of our different countries to really have good impact on that. And some people are working on those areas. And collectively, we can actually start to help each other, I think. Our next question. Okay. I felt it was really important that we ask people an open-ended question. And that question is, what is the biggest challenge that you face on a daily basis? And we let people write in, and we got 590 responses. And I read through them, and I felt the best way to represent that was to create a word cloud. So if anyone doesn't know, a word cloud is where you take all the different words and you plug them into a generator, and the greater the frequency with which the word is repeated, the larger that word is going to be in this word cloud. So let's go to that next area. So this is what people are dealing with. bladder, pain, bowel, care. Those are the real ones that stand out to me. And then there's many different iterations of that. And we can actually go back to the comments and we can really look at specific things there and create themes that are beyond those 4 themes that pop out right there. But those 4 things are really critical. Every single one of us knows about these issues. And I feel like that needs to be our guiding force. We really need to be doing things that are the biggest challenges that our community is living with. Next slide. Okay, then we wanted to know, okay, well, how active do people want to be? Everybody is different, everybody has different lives, different challenges, different capacities. Sometimes people just want to receive information, sometimes people want to be active. So we need to get a gauge on, our community and what are their interests and areas. So we asked about research advocacy, care advocacy, and policy advocacy. And we'll go to the figure. So most importantly, people want to receive information about research. And this is actually a really big theme that came up out of our SCI 2020 survey. People felt like they didn't know enough about research or the research process. And they also felt left out of the process. So we need to come up with more ways of trying to either distill information and push it out to people, or collectively identify different resources that makes it easier for people to find sources of information. People also want to receive information about care and then be active in research advocacy, active in care advocacy. These are all pretty minor differences if you talk about the different rankings. And then receive information about policy and be active in policy. And maybe people don't really know how to be active in policy. But we heard very eloquently yesterday in the final session from the Cure Advocacy Network that even just a couple of people can have a big impact in legislative bodies. So, and actually United Spinal does a really, really effective job of this every year when they organize the Roll on Capitol Hill couple of days. Okay, next slide. We asked people, where do they want to be involved in the research process? And this is a thing that came up out of SCI 2020. We said at the end of our report that we wanted people to be engaged in the research process. And so, okay, that's great, but where do people want to be engaged? And so if we go to the next click, this is a wonderful diagram that Heather Gainforth and John Chernesky and Johnny Burke and John Shepard came up with last year for a presentation they did at the ISCOS meeting. And these are different parts of the research cycle. So one individual grant, it goes through research question, funding application, developing the methods, doing the research, analyzing the data, and then disseminating the results. And there is evidence that people can be involved in all of these different areas. So we ask people what are their priorities if we go to the next forward. And actually I'm gonna ask you to click one time as I go through each. So the first area, if you click, that people wanted to be involved, engaged with was as advisors and partners to research teams. So that's in the conduct of research area. The second area is partnering to design studies that people actually want to participate in or are easier for people to participate in. The third area is identifying research questions that are meaningful to our population. The fourth area is being involved in developing the funding application or even in the review process, being on consumer review boards. The fifth area is helping with dissemination to get the word about the research out to our community. And then the sixth area was in interpreting the data and helping to analyze the data. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Then after SCI 2020, probably in May or June period, the organizers of the meeting from NINDS, they distilled everything that they heard and they put out different themes that they wanted public comment on. And the executive council put in written public comment to that that request. But we also asked in the survey, what is our community thinking about these different themes? And we'll go to this slide. So one of the themes was around research that would improve functional recovery with assistive technology. Another theme was understanding the full range of health impacts in spinal cord injury, chronic spinal cord injury. Another theme, the third one, was understanding and doing more research on neuromodulation and use-dependent plasticity to enhance function. Then the fourth one down here is accelerating research and discovery of therapies for repair and plasticity from beyond the acute period and through chronic injury. And then lastly, improving care in the acute trauma setting. So in general, people feel like these areas are pretty important. If we go forward one, there was this theme on neuromodulation and use-dependent plasticity. You'll notice there's a lot of the gray area, which is the unsure. I was looking through the comments, and people don't know what neuromodulation and use-dependent plasticity is. So when people talk about neuromodulation, when they're talking about epidural stimulation, and that link doesn't automatically come. So one thing is that the research community and our community can do more to come up with better descriptions of different words and different areas of research so that people really know what those areas are and what it means, actually. Okay, next forward, we also allowed for open comments on those different themes, and we got a lot of those comments as well, and I did another word cloud for that, and go forward. And you'll see what comes up are a lot of comments on care and cure. And very importantly, research is all real. People think research is important. That was actually a misconception by some people of what came out of our SCI 2020 panel. We were not saying that research is not important. We were saying we want to feel the impact of research. And one thing was really striking, one comment was really striking. If you go forward one, someone said, some of these research categories seem similar. There's nothing about translation and best practices, so those with SCI can benefit from the dollars that are spent on research. And this is really the crux of the problem. And how do we fix that part of the system? So that's what we're really going to be talking about in the last session today. And it's not any one person or any one stakeholder's problem. It's a problem with the system that we are living in today. Okay, move forward. These are the general demographics of the people that participated in the survey, and it's actually very similar to the people that, the demographics for the people that participated in the SCI 2020 survey. But our strength is reaching people via our social networks. So it's not necessarily the same people that participated in the SCI 2020 survey that participated in this survey. There are probably overlaps, but I think we're getting a better and better. This is a real representation of our population that is living out there. And I think that this can really help inform researchers. And we're gonna develop a study. We aren't just looking at mid-thoracic injuries, and we're not just looking at cervical injuries. There's a lot of lower thoracic injuries, and there's a lot of lumbar sacral injuries. And they're, like I said before, they're all getting excluded. But maybe we need a little bit more effort on those problems specific to those lesion areas. And obviously we have a significant number of people that are living with more than 20 years post-injury. So I will just summarize if we go forward, and then we can open up for a little bit of discussion. The first point is care and research. I think their cure and research are really combined, but that and care are very important to our community. And go forward, the real thing, like I mentioned, is that if we can start to feel the impact of research in care, then we're actually starting to solve the problem. Next, our community has told us that we need to work on improving access to SCI specialized care and access to research studies and clinical trials. And we need to focus on these challenges that are the biggest challenges people are facing on a daily basis: bladder, bowel care, and pain. And one last summary slide here, if we go forward. We need to do a better job on sending out more information about research and care. So those are communication strategies we can work on. And we need to build our capacity within the community so people can be more engaged in the research process. But we need to maybe prioritize our efforts in areas that people really want to be engaged in. And we're gonna have questions now, but then Barry is gonna take up continuation of the field of the topic of building capacity. And we are, so we have about 15 minutes for questions here before we go into the building capacity. And I would like to actually ask Devin, do we have any questions that have come in online yet? Okay, none yet. So we have a microphone runner, and let's start with questions here. And Tara, and please make sure that you speak into the microphone, because that's actually feeding into the online link so people can hear it. Over there, Tara, yeah.
Thanks, Kim. This is a great summary of all the work which has been done, and I'm sure how much effort you have put in bringing this forward to us and sharing today. So I understand we have 4 great areas here, but cure and research, we have to really be very specific what we are looking at in cure. Cure means different things to different people, and research means different things to different people. And where do we see embedding our implementation as well as translation within this? Like you brought the main theme of one of the persons saying, where is translation and best practices implementations in this? So if we can be a little bit more implicit in what we are meaning by cure and how we embed this within our work and how do we go forward, because we don't want to have people have false hopes.
Right.
What really is going to be curable, and what is our time trajectory to even go through this cure within the next 5 years, research in next 5 years, so we can have some parameters around which we can think of these things.
Okay, can I respond, and then we'll have Peter get a question. And these are all things for all of us to discuss, and so, and Megan, thank you for taking notes. Yes, cure means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and probably about 20 years ago, the Institute of Medicine said that there shouldn't be just one cure, there should be multiple cures, and therefore all of those different problems that are part of spinal cord injury. And I think that we should be prioritizing ourselves on bladder, bowel care, and pain, because that's what the people are telling us are the first areas and the most difficult areas. The other comment is that about implementation and best practices, that's part of translation. And this afternoon, I'm gonna talk about the whole spectrum of translation. It's not just going from animals to human and doing a clinical trial. Translation is getting all the way out to the population and healthcare. And so we need to make sure that people are always thinking about that. And that takes implementation science research and dissemination research.
Thanks, Kim. I just have more of a clarity question. In the survey, how is care defined? Because in the previous slide, when you said what people want to work on, it said bowel, bladder, pain, and care. Mm-hmm. So how does care differentiate from those other areas as well?
Well, in the first question, which is about cure, research, care, and policy related to our mission, that was not defined. That was just broad for each one of those. Then when we asked specifically about SCI specialized care, medical care. Okay, so that was a separate, yeah. And then the one that came up with the bladder, bowel care, and pain, those are people's open comments about what their challenges are. And care is what came up frequently. And yeah.
I just don't understand what that means, like care, like how do you put that in an operational context? Like,
that's the next step. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to care. You know, it could be medical care, it could be attendant care, it could be financial care. It all rolls up into the same problem, right? Yes. The same challenge of getting through every day.
No, it's just because all of them were specific, and then care was really, really broad. So bowel, bladder, pain, very specific.
Yes.
And then care can mean everything.
It could, and actually, so with the word cloud, it's not talking about phrases. It's just the individual words that are frequently brought up. We can go to the full comments and identify the real themes that are contextualized. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Kim. Yeah, so first things first, I think it's amazing results to look at. I think it's fantastic to see the opinions and voices of our community. One thing I did notice though, when we were, I think what Peter's sort of getting at, and maybe I'm feeling the same way, is we're talking about translation, and I think about the translation of actual terminology and how that, you know, words are used and what people interpret them as. Because I noticed on the survey you were talking about neuromodulation and movement-dependent plasticity. I think you understand what that means. I think a lot of us in this room understand what that means, but I don't think the average person understands what that means. You know, I was just reading a paper Solinsky published a couple weeks ago. He surveyed physicians on whether their patients had asked them about spinal stimulation. 60% said that they had been asked about it by their patients. So I think there's clearly a lot of people that are aware of neuromodulation. I just think maybe it's the terminologies that we're using that are confusing people sometimes.
Right. I took the phrases that NIH put in their themes. That's what those this was shortened so it could fit on a slide. But I took the actual phrase and sentence that NIH came out with about each of these themes.
So maybe, you know, obviously this is NIH's terminology and we have to stick with that, but maybe we could also help to provide more of a, you know, a lay definition of what these terms mean, so people have a better understanding. Maybe that might help.
Of course. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I should announce who I am for people online, but
Yes.
This is John Gensel.
Yeah.
Well, just to address your comment, I think that whether, you know, these terms are things that NIH is coming up with or not. So I'm a basic science researcher, and that's where I'm coming from with these thoughts. I mean, I think we have the ability to change that. You know, I mean, it's within our power as grant writers that I am to educate the review panel and say, hey, when we're talking about neuromodulation, this is what it's being referred to. And so I think it's really important for the community to let us know where these, or for us to understand where the misinterpretations are, and then we can work to try to sort of educate our field, because it also happens on the reporting side of things, right? So when we kind of disseminate our findings out to the community, we're going to stay within the terminology that we use in our day-to-day lives, which is not going to be necessarily consistent with stuff. And just to follow up with all that too, even for me, seeing that neuromodulation and it seemed very ambiguous to me. I didn't really understand where that was specifically falling even in the basic science sort of realm. So I'm not surprised those comments are ambiguous.
And yeah, within the basic science and even within the clinical researchers that are doing this, they all have different definitions of neuromodulation and use-dependent plasticity. Dale.
Dale Hull. Yeah, following up on these comments, you know, as I'm sitting here listening to you present this is the kind of information that I could see that needs to come to other conferences like ASCIP or Asia. In fact, the last ASCIP, or not this year, but 2 years ago at ASCIP, you know, they had a panel of individuals who talked about their experience with epidural stimulation. The interesting aspect of that was how many of the attendees who are professionals, PTs, physicians, scientists, had never really ever heard anybody talk about their experience with epidural stimulation. And it was very revealing. So this is the kind of information I would love to see presented at these conferences so that basic scientists and clinicians say, oh, this is what people really want to know about and they're concerned about. But as to Peter's comment and the other comments, I think it's probably important for us to develop a glossary so that when we use these terms, there's no ambiguity in terms of what we mean and what people mean by that, because we don't want to confuse clinicians and scientists in that same way.
Exactly. Yeah. Did we have a question from the online, Devin? Yeah. Someone take the mic back.
We had a question from Heather Taylor. I'm not sure if she's even left in the room now, but she just asked how many people responded to the questions, and was it equally men and women, or what was the split between them?
We had 500, this is data from 590 people. And actually, if you go backwards a couple slides, the far, it was probably, if I remember, yeah, go, that's too far, go forward, back, yeah. Right there. It's probably about 2/3 male and 1/3 female, which is actually very similar to how the population is changing in the last 10 years or so, in at least in the US. And how is Canada? It's about like that, yeah. Mm-hmm. We have about 5 more minutes for questions if there are more discussions that want to come up, or we can go straight in to starting to talk about building capacity. And we will be making all of the results from the survey available to, well, one, out to the community, to our membership. And if people want to analyze the results more, they can. Yeah, Dale and then Peter.
Just a quick question. Do you have contact information for the respondents, and do you have permission to go back to them to dig deeper? Meaning, if we wanted to explore some of these ideas in terms of what their interpretation or their definition, could we do that?
Right, we did not collect contact information from people this time. There were some people that actually did put their contact information in the comment areas, and so we could go back to those individuals. But also, this is not done in a research realm. You call this more of a marketing analysis. So we can, I think, if we decide collectively that we want to be able to go back to more people, we can do that, and we can communicate people through our membership to try to do that. Peter.
Yeah, I just think there's such rich information here, and I'm interested to know how council wants to disseminate it, right? Like, are we as organizations allowed to share some of the results that are from here? I think that would be very powerful.
Yes. Yes. I just finished analyzing them Saturday, though.
No, I'm not saying give it to me tomorrow, but
okay.
And there, you'll need a process, obviously.
Yeah.
But I'd love to share this in Ontario.
Yeah, we definitely want to share it, and if members have areas they want to dig into more deeply with the comments, we can do that. And also, one aspect of it being de-identified is that we can share the data set with people. John, and then Dennis.
Can we just go back one slide there? Just wanted to dig into, sorry. Oh, no, the clicker's not happening. So there we go. So looking at these priorities, so it's John Chernesky speaking for the online group. Looking at the wheel and sort of the areas that people were, as we're moving into this building capacity section of the agenda today, I just was wondering if people in the room had thoughts on these priorities. You know, for me personally, I'm most importantly focused on helping not just to identify the research questions, but helping researchers to shape questions that are meaningful to me and to people that I know with spinal cord injuries. So I see that, you know, the group has sort of said that they're most interested in advising research teams. And I just was wondering if we can explore that, those priorities and what people's thoughts are around what people, what their main areas of interest are.
Open that up. Claudia?
I was one of the people that did this survey, and I still don't know what neuromodulation means, even though I've had a spinal cord injury for, well, 48 years or something. But anyway, so yes, I think whoever suggested, maybe it was Dale, about a glossary, I think that would be really, really helpful. And then for me, the care also, whoever brought up that question, was really multiple. I mean, I am single, I live alone, but the care I really need is somebody to clean my house, which seems silly in a way, but if you can't vacuum or mop your house or even dust, you know, above your waist, then that sort of has gotten to the point where I can't even stand to go home. So yeah, the whole care thing is multifaceted for me, and I don't know that I wrote in comments, but whenever there is a survey, I think it's always helpful to be able to specify what it is that the question is asking. And I know that that's difficult to do in a survey and interpretation of the data and stuff, but in many ways I think it's necessary.
Dennis, did you have a comment over here? Susan, over here.
This is just a quick question. Does NASCIC have a preferred data repository for these kinds of data that are pertinent, that can provide a digital object identifier?
Actually, you and I talked about that previously, and we don't have a preferred one yet, but that is actually something that we should discuss, because you've got the bladder and bowel survey that is going to be ready to come out, and then we've got our SCI 2020 survey, and now this. And so actually it would be helpful from different researchers in the room that know about open repositories to help guide us to what might be the best one for this type of data to go into. Okay, I think we are going to move on to Barry. Can we get help with switching the lavalier?
Good morning. It's, you know, I'm starting to get excited again, just listening to this. And why I'm saying that is, for some people that are new to the whole SCI world, I don't know if you know how fascinating, how exciting this is that we're all together under one roof. Because if you asked or even talked about, this was a pipe dream 20 years ago, there's no way we would be. Part of the reason being is maybe we were just so busy in our own little fields, the silos were up. Maybe it was a matter of jurisdiction and some egos, and potentially that all just, a lot of that seems to be washed away. And the one thing that's coming out of the conversation, I see it's teased out in the questions too, is just know this, that NASCIC is really here to practically serve everybody in this room to some degree, and to help our constituencies come together and be able to share resources, really. And that just even talking about the last question from Dennis there was, I think, an important piece that we're going to be putting together. And that's kind of bridges into what I'm going to talk about today, in that we want to be a resource, but the reality is we don't know what the best way of doing things are, and we don't know what the best practices are. We're, this kind of represents kind of the way I go through life. I don't have an original thought in my mind. I just steal everybody else's ideas. But frankly, and I've been very fortunate in living in Ontario, with having the example of Peter in SCI Ontario and the work that they've done, watching what's come out of, sorry, I'm going to say Praxis now, and the work of Heather Gainsworth. Hello, Heather, online, and the IKT work, which is still going on, and even being introduced as a Canadian to, you know, Bill and Reunited Spinal and some of their advocacy work. This is an example of learning about great things happening all throughout the different corners of North America. And our job, really, why NASCIC was brought together, is how can we pool those resources, organize those resources, and then in turn serve back to our membership, which, by the way, is now at what? Our membership? 230 now, which represents, it's cross-representation of both individuals, but more importantly, organizations. So in reality, we're really representing hundreds of thousands of people, and that's incredible. And that's in a very short time. So I think we're doing something right, but we got a lot of work to do. So let's talk about building capacity. It seems to be a bit of a catchword that's been going on for a while. And to Anita Kaiser online and to John, we didn't forget about your presentation last year. You may recall that there was a presentation that went on, but we'll go on to the next slide there. Next slide. So really, I want to summarize the key topics is really what our role is. I've somewhat talked about that. The definition of building capacity, where we've been, the roles and abilities, and because now we've created a need that we have to deal with, and identifying the assets that we have, as well as moving forward and something like crowdsourcing, and how do we form the repository to organize the information so that people can easily access it. Again, the goal is to develop a plan that will build capacity in the SCI community initially, and which relates to both research, care, long-term goal of using these elements of the plan to build capacity in other sectors. So our strength really right now, just by the nature of the organizations and the sort of the need that was out there, was in the research space. But frankly, what we build in terms of capacity building could eventually be converted into all aspects of all the issues surrounding SCI, so that we as a general population in the SCI world are in a better position to have input on policy all around. So that's important for all of us. We really want to facilitate, motivate, and community in the high level. So again, we are not going to ever try to compete with anybody and say, this is what we're going to do. Like I said to Peter, we're going to steal your ideas so that somebody in Arkansas can share what's happening with what you're doing in Ontario, so that somebody in British Columbia can find out what's happening in Washington. These are all important things, because at the end of the day, SCI has no borders. We all face the same issues when we wake up in the morning and when we have to lay our head down at night, and all the caregivers that are out there, all the scientists and researchers and the therapists are out there. It's the same thing. So the idea is, how can we learn from each other and build and really bring something together in a unified way? Next slide. I thought, when I was putting this together, is really, we keep talking about building capacity. Why don't we just start with the basic, what's the definition? Capacity building is the process by which individuals and organizations obtain, improve, and retain the skills, knowledge, tools, equipment, and other resources needed to do their jobs completely. It allows individuals and organizations to perform at a greater capacity, larger scale, larger audience, and larger impact. It's pretty well what we're trying to do. Is we need to organize. We need to take the strengths of what we know, we need to build upon each other, and we need to be one voice in specific areas when it's time to be one voice. That's important, because if we are small, as an organization, as an individuals with spinal cord injury, we are a small group who have big needs, but we have big hearts and lots of passion. But we need to organize, and we keep going back and talking about, and it's been used, over the Working to Walk symposiums over the years, and we keep talking about the AIDS example and how that community really rallied together to make serious change quickly. We need to do something the same. We need to take that page out of their playbook, and we need to do that. And then this is the beginning, I think, of doing that. And just the fact that I look around in the room and here today and use you online, we're already doing that. So this, again, I'm excited, but there's a lot of work to do. Again, I made reference to the proposed, sort of the presentation that Anita and John made last year, and you'll see the diagram that they put together, and it was very comprehensive. It really kind of summed it up in a nutshell, and it really takes on a lot. And so we're deciding where do we go with capacity from here, and it's how much of a bite out of that apple we're going to take, and really trying to break it down into pieces so that we can achieve a long-term goal where we're actually in a position of a high-level training of sorts of people in the SCI world and how they can be applied in different aspects of the SCI world. So again, I applaud Anita and John for your work last year and really setting the stage to get things going in this direction. Well, I thought I'd go with the quote, "Be careful for what you wish for." And probably the best example of that was us as NASCIC being invited to SCI 2020 last year, where we got to talk about the needs of the community, and we talked about, frankly, a bit of a dissatisfaction from the community. And yes, there was a bit of fallout, and we ruffled some feathers and hurt some people's feelings. Oh, well, didn't help me every morning when I get up. That's all I have to say. And try living a day in our shoes. Yeah. So we'll get over it. It's all going well. But what we've realized is there was a bit of a proliferation of almost a need of having people. We need people with spinal cord injuries sitting on our advisory panels. We need people advising us in research, and we're there. Okay, now we're getting there, and now it's also becoming potentially mandated in research studies of having that input. And as John was asking earlier, you know, what level? Why not in the very beginning in the design of it? Why not? It's not just the person that's going to sit on a board and just be there. It's got to have a meaningful role in the process. And it's not just the individual, it could be their organization and how they can access it through surveys and their own groups on a local level and how they can have input. It's complex. So now here we are. This is the good problem that we have. And we felt that NASCIC needed to respond to that. And that's hence the kind of the journey we're taking on building capacity in a more formulated way. I thought we'd also talk about myths, because the old definition of having people with spinal cord injury involved in research is you know, you need to sit on an advisory committee. And the first thing that people start thinking, and you know, frankly, some of the people on these that were asking about having people sit on the advisory committee, we want Kim and Anita's times 100 to sit there and basically act as scientists on advisory. That is not what we need. You know, I keep making reference to something that even in this room, there are about a few hundred years, maybe 1,000 years in this room of people either working or living with spinal cord injury that are experts in spinal cord injury. Right here in this room. That's what we bring to the table. So the community itself brings that experience to the table. You don't want to be there as a scientist on a scientific advisory panel. You want to be there as a person from the community representing the community. And then, you know, and really the other part is there's a danger of that too. And I bring to, it's all about me and my experience. How many have sat in rooms and on committees where they brought somebody from the community to speak about, you know, their personal experience? It turns into kind of a 3-hour personal experience thing. That's not what they're there for either. And that's, we need to make sure that that doesn't happen either. We need to make sure that in some formulated way, and maybe it's through a training way, maybe it's through a certification, we're not there yet, but the people that are invited to these committees that can represent themselves, tell their story, relate it to their personal experience, but also be able to broaden it to the community's experience. You know, I mean, you can get trapped in this. You could spend hours talking about your own life. That's not what people want to hear. They want to hear how it impacts you, but that's after the 10-minute mark. Then it's into, but I have 17 friends that have all these different experiences, or I know this one guy that goes through this, and they go, no way, I know a guy that goes through this. You have to be able to almost be a delegate of the community in some ways, in cases. So there's almost really, how do we really bring together that type of advocacy? And there should be a role of organizations. It's happening, of organizations in this room that are already doing that. And really what we'd like to do is find the best practices of how we could do that to make sure that when we're invited to the show, that we don't screw it up. That we go there and we have a meaningful role in this. And that's going to be a bit of a thing that we have to figure out. But we don't want to mess up the opportunity where we can have a true voice and speak to that. And I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, but we got to get out of the concern of having people just really relate everything to themselves for hours and hours and hours, because that could hurt really the process. So, Peter, I ripped this off from you, by the way. Again, and I might have didn't quite get the phrase right, but really what it comes down to is, you know, we said a development of good research. So really defining what good research is with our community, meaning with our input, with us really being part of it, will always lead, I think it will, to good healthcare and research policy. If we're involved in the process from the beginning, we can really have an impact, which makes a difference and an argument. You heard about what Matt was saying yesterday when they go into a state legislature and they're advocating for more research dollars, and they actually talk about the need for more research dollars. Well, they make an economic argument, which people don't even know about. But if you really break down specifically what the priorities are for people in the community, and we can gauge that, and then focus that, and then communicate that, guess what can happen? Potentially, they will change that policy to reflect that dead on. Because the worst thing you want to do is actually have an impact. They change the policy, but they miss the mark. And because you can't go back and do that all over again. There's just not enough resources. So let's get it right the first time. But the only way we're going to get it right is through our own community. You know, we can't even in here decide what we think is the priority of our community until our community tells us what the priority is. And that might make a difference regionally. What some people might need in the state of Arizona is not the same as what some might need in the province of Nova Scotia. It just might be different because governments have responded in certain ways to certain things over the years. So the priority in one jurisdiction might be very different than another. But let's find and look and work together. And that's what NASCIC is supposed to do, we think, is how we can help communicate to the jurisdictions and share and upload that resource of what's happening throughout all of North America. All right, so there is basically what we deemed as a sort of a three-phase approach to this. And this is kind of going back, John and Anita out there, in what you said at the beginning, that we're looking at how do we really build this thing and what's the long-term goal of building capacity and what it's going to look like. And to be blunt, it's all about how much can we bite off at this time. And we're also being mindful of what Heather Gainsforth is doing out there. And you may or may not know this, but it's a very comprehensive research work on IKT, which is, you know, knowledge transfer, and really looking at so much is related to building capacity within the community through information and translating that information back to the community, but really looking at the best standards and a kind of a level of how potentially we might all follow down the road. So before we get ahead of that, we thought the role of NASCIC, at least initially in the first year, maybe 2 years, is help to gather the information, help to curate the information and be that repository and look at all the different programs that are out there. And you may hear the word patient-oriented healthcare. Like it or not, that's what we are in some cases. But some of the tools that they're using through the hospital institutions, something like, you know, NIH and CIHR, they actually have some pretty good program, at least some tools out there that help relate that. And so we're really looking at sort of bringing together that information first. So that's what our first plan of action is going to be, is really going after that information and bringing together all the resources that there are and really trying to understand what we can do with that and be as exhaustive as we could in the first part. Then what we want to do is really look at, once we're doing that, in the midst of all this, the mechanism is basically to put together a working group, really like another project group. Jennifer, we're adding another one to the group, and we're calling upon our NASCIC members and frankly, everybody in this room, if you want to be part of this working group, please let us know, because we need the guidance of the leaders in our community to help us shape our efforts and in what direction, and help us navigate through, which is a lot of stuff. And frankly, I found a long time ago that you get the right people in the room that can give you guidance, you can save yourself a lot of time, a lot of wasted time too. So by all means, anybody that has any interest in this area, if you want to kind of jump in a little bit, let us know, and we'd love to have you on board as part of the this working group. So this is really a summary of the timelines of what we want to do. We want to recruit now in terms of bringing in the information, putting the working group together. And then in the phase 2, we're looking at probably mid to late 2020, where we'll actually have the information that we want to really organize it on a short-term basis where people can easily access information if they're looking to learn more about ID. For example, I want to learn more about the research space. I want to, going back to glossaries, Dale, how do I understand when I'm navigating through this thing? So someone at a very basic level that's new to the SCI, someone that's been at it for 20 years but might want to take a more comprehensive role in the research space. There'll be kind of different levels of learning that we can offer that. Not quite a certification type of role, not quite an academy or institute. We're not there yet. I think that's where we might be going, But really, it's up to the community to dictate how that's going to go and how the working group is going to do this. The plan is what I've just lined out for you is we are currently seeking some support through a grant that will help provide the resources to bring that all together and really facilitate and help a working group to put this all together in the first initial stage and take it from there. So stay tuned. We're working on that right now, and we're about to finalize that. And hopefully, and we're pretty confident, if it's not through that resource, through some other way, we'll make sure that we can make this a priority and facilitate that. But really, that's pretty much what I had to say today. We just wanted you to know that capacity building is a major priority of NASCIC, as it is for many other organizations, that to have change, the changes that we think are all necessary at various levels, we need to be better organized and better educated, and to be stronger that way, that I think will be more effective and frankly have a better penetration in terms of making an impact. And that's really the goal. It's nothing new to other maladies and other groups out there that are advocating, but to be true advocates, we have to be educated, and we have to have the knowledge to go the next step. And that knowledge could be in the field itself, or it could be in the idea of the process of how to do that. And again, there are smarter people out there and in this room that know this space much better than we do. What we're trying to do is be the glue that brings it together, so that for those that are out there in different parts of North America that are very weak in this area, they can lean on us. And those that are out there, I think what I can tell you is the people that are leading in this area always have the time to share this information. And it's very exciting to see. We're all brothers and sisters in this one, and we all really care about how one person with a spinal cord injury is impacted, no matter where they are in the world, and that's exciting. And that passion is important, and I can only applaud you online, your organizations, and the people in this room. You're really here for one reason, is to make change and make things better for all of us, and bless you, because I think it's great. But let's roll up our sleeves and get things done. All right. Okay, questions? And online first, any questions, Devin? Not yet. We'll go Bill and then Peter and then Michelle.
Thanks. Comment, and I guess it could end up in an action step or an open question. Looking at who all was at Working to Walk yesterday, and heavily engaged in the SCI community from all of our different silos. And thinking about your words, Barry, about building capacity. We've talked about this a little bit in the Executive Council. Is anybody here from ASCIP? Part of ASCIP. Anybody here from Asia? Okay, so I didn't understand. I didn't know that. That's good to have. PVA. Reeve had a big presence yesterday. Oh, great. Didn't know. Thanks. And Reeve today. I know that they had a good presence yesterday. And Nielsen. So obviously, different people have different schedule needs, and maybe some of those folks weren't able to stay for the third day this time. But for the ones that aren't here, we need to solicit them. We need to work during the year to get their input. And so I've been doing information specialist work for 15 years. And about 13 years ago, I saw some intentional bringing together of groups, which 5 or 6 years later led to United Spinal being formed from several groups, a couple of bigger groups, plus a publication. We had 3 publications. Now we boil down to the best one and dump the other 2. So, we're able to speak a little bit more with one voice that way. But I mean, to me, that's what the North American Consortium is all about, is speaking with one voice. So while the numbers for membership far outstripped our original goals, I think we have to work to double it for next year, including, the policy people and the the action step people, the decision makers from all of those organizations. And they all need to be here, and we need to be all working on the same thing together, or we're not going to get anywhere. And continue to put aside the pettiness or things that lead to competition, and those great sponsors that are sponsoring us, let them sponsor the group, instead of us fighting for sponsorship dollars against one another when we ought to be working together. So I guess any comments you could add to that, Barry, would be my question.
Well, you're right. The tent is big, and we need, again, to grow the people under the tent and be more inclusive. But we're always mindful too that I think at the end of the day, when you're a bunch of nonprofits, there's going to be a couple of scuff ups over sponsorship dollars and funding. But we're mindful as an organization that we're really doing the best we can to completely stay away from that. But at the same time, make sure that there are the resources to do what we need to do with all of you. Michelle, you had a question. And then Peter.
Thank you. Thank you, Barry. I'm Shelley. We're one of the sponsors. I'm from DP Clinical. I did raise my hand as being from Asia, but I do a lot of work with Asia as well, so I'm not specifically from Asia. Barry, I just wanted to comment on your the slide you had up there about development of good research. When I see something like that, I go back to Claudia's comment about care. Care is different for everybody. When I look at research, what kind of research are we talking about? Is it your basic scientist at the bench, or is it research moving into phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials? Because of course, that's the world that I live in. And I see failures in that realm, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials all the time. And I think we really need to define all areas of research, not just your basic scientist bench research. So that's something I would like better defined as well. And I know we'll get into this later, but getting, like John said, we need input. We need people at the table when these clinical trials are being designed, and just moving forward in that aspect. So mainly, I don't really have a question. Mainly, mine is just a comment.
Sorry, you want to say something, Kim, to respond to that? Okay, maybe just bring the mic up here. Come on up, Mom.
Yeah, we are going to talk about this later this afternoon, but all of those stages of research of translation, and it doesn't just end with clinical trials. It's translation out to practice and translation out to the population. So all of that different research, like in that, if to be simple, that falls into the one little ball of good research. And it is different people at different areas of those expertise. And so yes, working on increasing our ability to access all of those different people and communicate with them in a more strategic way.
Great comments, Barry, about your presentation around capacity. I just wanted to make a comment just about some of the lessons that I've learned in the past around building networks. And one of my biggest lessons learned is that you don't have to always go back and survey your community all the time. Your largest asset is the organizations that are behind you. And sometimes the question is, what organizations have information around the question that you're asking for, as opposed to having to build a big on survey to solicit information when the information can already be available. That's just a comment that can help in terms of some of the capacity that you're going to have to try to sustain, because it's not going to be easy to function as North America across a lot of different diverse priorities. So that's just one comment that I wanted to make around capacity.
Perfect. Well, that's very helpful. Thank you. Any questions online, Devin? Okay.
So just one comment there, thought that came up is, I appreciate the stewardship to ensure that, the representatives that end up on these research boards and stuff are really representing the community, not the individual needs. And it struck me as the fact that I'm not sure that from the research side of things that we're necessarily doing the same thing, right? We haven't had polls to ask what's the comments of the researchers, yet we're asked, I'm here, right, representing our membership from Scoburg, and I have to try to represent our group from the small group of University of Kentucky, but I'm also representing the researchers as a whole. And so it's just a thought that there is probably some maybe some stewardship that should happen on this side too, to ensure that when as bigger groups, you said it's a large umbrella, right? And if we're getting input from clinicians and researchers and the community and everything, that is there, what do we do on the side of, you're very cognizant of making sure that the representation that takes place, let's say on a research advisory board, is going to represent the needs of the community. Are we doing things on sort of the research side of things to ensure that the representation that we're providing is also truly, representative of our community, the research community, let's say, or the clinical community?
Well, that's a good
right?
point. And that's a good question. And I think we're going to touch on a little bit today when we talk about the tools and sharing, because one of the things that we keep talking about is distilling and educating people in the community, people with lived experience about research. At the same time, what's the communication to researchers and knowing about the community's needs and where they should be going and prioritizing the research that they're doing, and how do we talk to researchers, and how should we, we're always talking about converting it into the language that the community can understand, and if they're in the research setting. At the same time, researchers can't operate on their own. They have to be, it's a dialogue that we're trying to create. And I go back to that second last question yesterday, or the last question at Working to Walk, is what's the plan? Well, this is part of the plan. And, and Matt made mention of it, like we're chipping away and there's micro plans. There still needs to be the big plan, I guess, but this is a way of filling in parts of the plan, but you're right. That's a good point. Any other questions? Oh yes, Megan here.
So maybe toward that last comment about how people can be good delegates of the community, I'm kind of reminded of like when you go to some organizations, they'll have on their website like the press kit, which is basically the right terms to use if you're talking about this particular group or whatever. And I'm kind of wondering if something similar could be put together. Over time, you're going to have amassed all these survey results, and you're going to have a really good sense of what the SCI community is expecting when it comes to participation in research at these different stages. And a good delegate would be someone who just has their little note sheet that explains what the surveys have already expressed about the whole community, what makes participation possible, or what would reduce some of the challenges or the burdens, and just sort of hand the press kit off to them, and then they become a good spokesperson for the community. That's just a thought.
That's good. And again, part of the resource building that we put together the working group will kind of give us that guardianship and in developing that. I mean, I look at what Matt does with the Cure Advocacy Network. There's basically a kit, more or less, you're equipping each individual as advocates. And I know what Peter does. Like it's really defining what's the best resources for the best situation. But the idea is that we're going to try to pull that from all of the organizations as best we can and try to distill that into something that's readily accessible that people can access in terms of how we can bring that together as North America.
I want to kind of go back to John's point there of, researchers doing, are they representing themselves collectively and assessing themselves that way? One thing that NASCIC has been doing over the last year and a half since we started, extremely small, is trying to focus our efforts on growing our membership related to our community in our community organizations and our individuals and family members with spinal cord injury because we had to start somewhere. But now I think we are ready to start in reaching out to more membership with our partners. And our partners are basic scientist researchers, clinical researchers, implementation science researchers, healthcare providers, healthcare systems, industry partners of all different kinds, and then potentially even government partners. And so it takes time to build up all of that. We don't have 15 years under our belt, Bill. And, but one thing that I struck is we need to figure out a way to communicate with our partners back and forth. What do basic science researchers need from us? What do clinical researchers need from us? What are areas that would be helpful for them? What does industry need from us? I know that, you know, reimbursement is this huge challenge for industry, and it's a huge challenge for us because we can't get things that we need. What can we do strategically to work together to help each other on that? So I think those are all areas to try, you know, slowly chip away at and figure out how to, it might be in the beginning is synthesizing the information that's already out there because it's all scattered out in space. So John, did you have a comment?
And then Megan. Yeah.
First thing, Kim, I completely agree with you. I think, you know, we started reaching out to, you know, spinal cord injury community organizations and individuals with spinal cord injury as our core sort of membership. But I agree, you know, we need to reach out with our other partners and have them be part of these conversations so that we're not just preaching to the choir, as it were, that we've got more of the research community and the industry community and hopefully bring government and policymakers into the conversation as well. But what I wanted to actually do, the question I want to ask is maybe a bit of a crowdsourcing here. You mentioned about bringing people with lived experience into basic science. This is a question that I get asked by, you know, basic scientists all the time is, you know, it's quite easy to see how a person with lived experience could help with a trial on an exoskeleton or a trial on a, you know, working in spinal stimulation, whatever it might be. You know, human-based research is easy to relate to as a person with spinal cord injury. But when we're talking about basic science, you know, unless you have some biological knowledge or some understanding of neuroscience, it can be challenging to figure out how a person with lived experience would contribute to a basic science project. So we've got a lot of smart brains in the room. I'm wondering if people have some thoughts on that.
Now, Megan, did you still have a question after this?
So,
okay, so we'll go John and then Matt and then Peter, then Megan.
So I can comment on this from a personal perspective, my own perspective, as well as what's happening sort of in the research community. You know, my own perspective is just that, you know, I'm actually been doing this for a long time, been doing this for 20 years, and I'm kind of tired of improving the lives of mice, which I'm very good at. And so, you know, I'm gonna, and you know, and I plan to be doing this for a longer period of time. When I look back at my career, I don't want to say, wow, I've been really effective at mice, right? And so that's my motivation, why I'm here. What's happening, I think, to answer your question, I think you just have to do it. You just need to get people involved and we'll figure it out. And the DoD is starting to do this. So we submitted a grant, and one of the requirements was we needed consumer advocacy as part of our research team. And they couldn't be researchers. And so, you know, I've known a few individuals and got them involved. So far, all we did is submit the proposal and say we're going to, you know, discuss it through Skype meetings at minimum monthly and maybe weekly, and just talk about what we're doing. And, you know, I think it's our goal. I think it's sort of our responsibility as basic science researchers to also communicate to the entire community, whether it's other fellow researchers, whether it's individuals with spinal cord injury, you know, or clinicians who also, I'll say, the dialogue between clinicians and basic science researchers, in my experience, we live in two different worlds. I mean, we do things as basic science researchers that we're interested in, and there may or may not be overlap in what is desired from the SCI community, and there may or may not be overlap in what's actually feasible from a clinician perspective. Because, you know, we can do research, but if clinicians aren't interested in that, or they don't believe it, or it's not clinically feasible, then it doesn't really matter whether it needs, in some ways, how much it needs both of SCI researchers or, you know, SCI individuals. So I don't think you need to figure out a way for it to be implemented, to just start. And once that process starts, I think we'll understand where the commonalities lie. And there's a lot of, I think, clinically informed research that can be done at a basic science level that doesn't require a heavy neuroscience background. I mean, we make decisions in all of our research designs on outcome measures of whether we use X test or Y test to assess, let's say, locomotor recovery or bowel recovery. And, if someone from the community says, hey, I don't understand what you're talking about when you do this, some, research-based, name-based outcome measure but when you say, hey, I want to run a test where I'm looking at, let's say, just footfalls and walking patterns, it'd be like, okay, I understand that. And so that would be something that maybe would be a better priority to involve in your research as something that can then be related to the community, right? If part of the thing is gaining information and then disseminating it, it's also having some tangible understanding of what that means. And I think those things can maybe come out through those things. So I would just say we just sort of need to start, and it will figure itself out a little bit. And naturally, the people who are going to get involved in the research are going to be people who are willing and have the patience probably to work with us basic science researchers, and people who are maybe going to go the extra mile. That's how it's going to start, right? We're not going to be pulling people off the street. It's going to be people who are willing to volunteer their time. And so within that, there's probably higher capacity to find common ground.
All right, well, Matt, then while you're down there, you can do Rebecca, then over to Peter. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks for that answer. Similarly, I appreciate the just let's do it. And the ways that we do it. And so I think of three things. I think of, and Sasha and I talked about this at Neurotrauma, formal, informal, and activist. Formal would be like what you described of including the community in DoD grants, and how systemically is the community involved with basic scientists. Informal would be more like, I joke about it with folks in Minnesota because I want to call it lab rats. There's a lot of scientists that have said to me, boy, I wish you could bring a group of people to my lab and meet my students and see what we do. It would motivate my students and help them understand what we're doing. And so we've done that on a number of occasions in Minnesota, bring folks from the community to the lab and become familiar a little bit. Activist is what Barry mentioned, is a Cure Advocacy Network. We pass bills, we use money as a tool, like a sort of force of influence to bring the community to the table to make decisions and prioritize research, and also in turn educate the community about the research. So it's the ways in which we do it, but at the end of the day, really, it's that we do it. Because I was thinking earlier, well, when the conversation was sort of circling around the big picture strategy, the roadmap, whatever. I was in a lot of conversations last night and even this morning about that whole question of, what's the strategy? Well, I think the strategy maybe related to let's do it is we need a roadmap to go west. Well, let's drive from here to Toledo and let's start there. And when we go to here to Toledo, it may not be the most direct route, and we may not get there the most efficiently, but as we're going from Toledo to Gary, from Gary to Chicago, we're going to learn what the map is and how we get there faster and what we need for the road trip, etc. And NASCIC was formed on this sort of idea or premise that this was going to be an action-oriented consortium. And so that do it thing, I think, is really important. Not that we're going to be careless and cavalier, but we need to be actionable. And as we action, we're going to draw more people, more ideas, more strategy to get where we want to go.
Rebecca there. Okay, we'll go Rebecca, Peter, then Megan, that'll be it. Thanks.
So I work at an activity-based therapy, and kind of the overwhelming thing that I'm hearing here is there's a disconnect between the community, the SCI community and the science community. And just from what I do in the community or the clinic that we work at, I feel like activity-based therapy is going to be involved in the prehab and the rehab on this journey towards a recovery for a spinal cord injury. And we can be a link within our wellness clinics or activity-based therapy centers between the SCI community and the science community. And I think implementing surveys or questionnaires or whatever within these facilities is a really nice marriage between what needs to be happening in the SCI community, and then from the therapist standpoints, we're also able to see, what do we need from the science community to make prehab and rehab most effective as well. And so, like Barry said, I think we can kind of be a good gateway going both ways to the science community and the SCI community for the integrated knowledge translation. And basically, I think maybe the activity-based therapy centers need to be involved in this dialogue as well, so we can get information going to and from both sides.
Excellent. We'll take you up on that. Okay. All right, over here to Peter.
Thank you. I think Matt hit most of my points, but for me, involving people with spinal cord injuries in the research space is about, as well as inspiration, awareness, gaining knowledge transfer, and building relationships. I think that's really important. So injecting people in basic science work is only going to be helpful and inspiring. One of the things that we try to bring a lot of focus into Ontario is really engaging young students in research and kind of co-opt them to become careers, to build careers in SCI research, so we can build and grow our community with a whole realm of different expertise. So to John's point is, yeah, let's get into the universities. Let's just bring people's perspective into our world, so people want to choose spinal cord injury as their careers.
Because my comment was 5 comments ago. But it's really just to amplify the point, because I was actually reacting to what you had said about maybe working harder to understand like what the research community needs. And what I would say is, I think you accommodate the research community enough. And I think it's okay to be more demanding of the ecosystem to bend in your direction. I think it's okay to plant the flag a little further out and say, come on, let's rally over in this direction. And I think the world will change around that if your voice is clear and it's heard. I would say it's okay to have some dissatisfaction with the status quo and to be demanding of more.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to take a, thank you very much. We're going to take a little 15-minute break, and then we'll get right back at it. So refresh, enjoy, do what you got to do. Okay, thank you.